body, and the plan is not the same.
We'll start with this. Well, Rick Ramos posted this via his Twitter account. It reads, "Let's run this back. Hashtag Taylor versus McCaskill 2. Hashtag Rick Ramos boxing. Hashtag boxing." And this isn't the first time that we've seen Team McCaskill beating the drum for a Katie Taylor rematch. We've actually been seeing them beat the drum for that rematch since they first fought approximately 4 years ago in 2017, though in truth, I don't think that a rematch with Jessica...
Ain't she supposed to be fighting Amanda Serrano next?
Provided Amanda makes it past Spain's own Miriam Gutierrez, a common opponent between Amanda and Katie Taylor. It's my understanding that if Amanda wins that fight, the very next fight for Amanda, the very next fight for Katie, is going to be the super fight between them. Taylor versus Serrano.
Are we supposed to poo-poo all over that fight for this one?
Rick tagged the WBA, the WBC, the WBO, and the IBF, the IBO as well, and Ring Magazine, though it's widely reported that the very next fight for Katie Taylor is Amanda Serrano, if Amanda makes it past Miriam Gutierrez, so I'm not sure what's going on here. Perhaps Katie Taylor can fight Jessica after the Serrano fight, provided that fight doesn't end up being 2 fights, provided Amanda doesn't upset the apple cart for her next year.
I mean, she could end up fighting Jessica McCaskill, or she could end up fighting the winner of Cameron versus Rice.
Or she might not end up fighting either of them if Amanda Serrano pulls this off, beats Katie Taylor. Then their fight could turn into 2 fights, 2 engagements. The way I see it, Katie Taylor has been pretty busy. She fought 3 times this year. 2 of those fights were against her mandatory challenger. She fought Natasha Jonas, she fought former IBF champion Jennifer Hahn, and she very recently took on Firuza Sharapova this past weekend, clearing the way for the undisputed showdown between herself, her contemporary, Amanda Serrano.
I don't think there are going to be any interruptions.
If Katie beats Amanda decisively in their first fight next year, then I don't think there will be a rematch. Not if it's a decisive victory, but if it's close, the way the Delphine Pursoon fight was close. So close that some people think Delphine should have got the nod. Delphine should have been awarded the decision. If it's that close, then I can definitely see there being a sequel. I can definitely see there being a rematch. Pushing a McCaskill rematch.
Win or lose, there's a possibility that Taylor versus Serrano gets 2 fights.
You heard that right. Win or lose, there's a distinct possibility that Taylor versus Serrano ends up being a 2-fight engagement. If Katie wins the fight, but it's very close, or if by some chance Amanda upsets the apple cart for her and Katie loses.
Might be 2 fights.
There are a lot of major bouts set to go down at or around these weights next year, not exclusive to Taylor versus Serrano, provided Serrano makes it past Gutierrez. There is also the 140-pound undisputed title tilt between unified champions Kaylee Rice and Chantel Cameron. The winner of that fight will be crowned as that division's undisputed champion. And a part of me feels like the people over there at Matchroom want to match that champion against Jessica McCaskill.
Later on in the year, that could happen.
To be completely honest with you, I've never heard Katie Taylor or Brian Peters or Eddie Hearn, for that matter, make any mention of a McCaskill rematch. I haven't heard that. What I have heard is a lot of mentions of an Amanda Serrano showdown, the fight we've all been waiting for, what's supposed to be the biggest fight in women's boxing.
Well, I don't know, maybe if Amanda fucks up the fight next year like she fucked up the fight last year.
Maybe then a McCaskill rematch will enter back into the picture, enter into the frame, though it's just as possible that the winner of Kaylee Rice versus Chantel Cameron might be an option in that scenario as well. Moving up from 135 to 147 is a pretty big jump, whereas moving up to 135 to 140, well, Katie's actually done that before, lest we forget. That's where she fought Christina Lenardatu for Christina's old WBO title.
If Katie's got to choose between moving up to 140 and moving up to 147.
Let's just say that there are two undisputed champions for Katie Taylor to choose from in a situation where Amanda Serrano fucks up the fight next year the way she fucked up the fight last year. Let's just say that happens, and Katie's got to choose between fighting for undisputed at 140 or fighting for undisputed at 147.
Katie really isn't a big woman, you know.
Doesn't have the biggest frame. I think 140 pounds, comparatively, would be a more comfortable weight for her than 147 pounds. She's never actually fought up there before.
So maybe she decides to fight the winner of Rice versus Cameron.
Would afford her the chance to become a two-time undisputed champion. I really don't know. This is a scenario where Amanda Serrano fucks up the fight. If she doesn't fuck up the fight and all goes to plan, well, Katie Taylor's 2021 might consist of two Amanda Serrano fights. At which point, who does Jessica McCaskill fight if that happens? Because she just entered into a multi-fight deal with Matchroom. In a situation like that, I could see Jessica McCaskill, provided she's still undisputed, locking horns with the winner of Rice versus Cameron.
And who's to say we don't see some pesky mandatories get ordered in the in-between time?
The very delicious Alma Ibarra is someone to keep your eye on, someone to think about, someone that might pose some issues moving forward. There's a lot to think about going into 2022.
But Amanda seems to be next for Katie.
You know, I know what point you're trying to make, you know, Bernardo, with the training wheels thing, but I'm not going to say that. I do feel like that's a little bit, you know, this is a guy, man, who, Gervonta's a dangerous dude. I don't care who you talk to in the sport of boxing. That's probably the only person that I've ever heard Shakur Stevenson like really say, hey, man, he's the truth. He's got respect for dudes and he'll shout guys out, but that's the only dude that I've heard Shakur say, man, nah, he gave me good work. So I don't think it's a training wheel thing, because it's the same thing Canelo does, right? Everybody has creative matchmaking. I'm going to get this guy, he's a name, but he's past his prime. Everybody's doing it. I'm not mad at what they're doing. I'm just saying, for me, I can't say you're the best lightweight in the world. I can't.
I'm mad at it. It's training wheels for this in this sense. You have not faced, except for Pedraza years ago, a legitimate champion. There have been vacant belts. There have been guys going up. You're not taking the belts like these guys did it, like Loma did it. He going to Luke Campbell's home, and like Teo did in an undisputed fight against this man. You know, and that to me is the way you do it. And whether you like what Canelo did or not, he fought every undefeated champion out there to take all the 68 belts. Whether they're weak or not, that's not his fault. Alexander Usyk went to everybody's hometown to become the undisputed cruiserweight champion. And there's ways to do it, and the way that Tank is doing it is by choosing no-name guys that bring nothing to the table but a record.
I don't think Tank is choosing.
This soundbite from Andre Ward, which was recorded post-fight after the Vasyl Lomachenko versus Richard Commey fight. This soundbite has ruffled a lot of feathers. A lot of people are losing patience with Andre Ward. They feel he's shading Canelo Alvarez.
They feel he has something against him.
Whether or not he does, only Andre Ward knows, but that's how people feel. They felt that way when they saw Andre Ward giving Caleb Plant some tips, some tricks ahead of Caleb's fight with Canelo Alvarez, and they feel that way here and now when they hear Andre Ward liken Gervonta Davis's matchmaking to Canelo Alvarez's matchmaking. Canelo Alvarez, who's fought every guy that had a belt at 168 pounds, where fight fans are still pleading with Gervonta Davis to fight someone relevant.
How could you honestly liken one to the other?
How could you honestly liken the matchmaking we see in Gervonta Davis's fights to the matchmaking we see in Canelo Alvarez's fights? Not only is Canelo Alvarez more active than Gervonta Davis,
Fights more often than Gervonta does.
fights more often against better opposition, better opponents, better fighters. Gervonta Davis is not some snot-nosed, wet-behind-the-ears, wide-eyed kid, you know. The guy's 27 years old. He's closer to 30 than he is to 20.
This was an exceptionally bad take.
Gervonta Davis is 27 years old. You want to know what kind of fighters Canelo Alvarez had already fought by age 27, at 27 years old? Not having the amateur background of a Gervonta Davis. By 27, he already fought Austin Trout, Floyd Mayweather Jr., Erislan De Lara, Miguel Cotto, and Gennady Golovkin.
These guys wouldn't let Tank fight fucking Tevin Farmer.
Or Vasyl Lomachenko for how many years now? By age 27, Canelo Alvarez was already a bona fide box office draw, a pay-per-view attraction.
We ain't talking about a paltry 215,000 pay-per-view buys.
Listen, there was a time when I myself was very critical of Canelo Alvarez, and over the years, given how his career has panned out, I had to reevaluate my stance on this fighter.
I don't think that any fight is above criticism.
But compared to these guys, especially a guy like Gervonta Davis, it's safe to say that the name of a Canelo Alvarez and the name of a Gervonta Davis, those two names don't belong in the same sentence. They're operating on very, very different wavelengths. And one would think that a fighter, a former fighter, former champion, former pound-for-pound darling would make light of that. And that's not what we're getting from Andre Ward. There's nothing ambitious about Gervonta Davis's matchmaking. Nothing historic.
Oh, you're not impressed with Canelo Alvarez's undisputed run.
And you're not impressed with his proposition at attempting to become a 5-division champion by procuring a title in the cruiserweight division. You're not impressed with all of this, but you're impressed with Gervonta Davis. You're impressed with him fighting on the back foot for 12 rounds against the very unheralded Isaac Cruz.
What would people say on Sunday morning if it were Vasyl Lomachenko that got put on the back foot by Isaac Cruz?
Ward's not wrong. Creative matchmaking is not exclusive to the matchmaking we see when it comes to Gervonta Davis. In truth, it exists in all of boxing and has existed for as long as I can remember. But there is a very distinct difference between the matchmaking you see for Canelo and the matchmaking you see for Gervonta.
You shouldn't ever bring up those two guys' names in the same sentence.
Canelo Alvarez is the genuine article, the face of boxing at this time, the biggest box office draw in the sport. Canelo Alvarez is a full-fledged, bona fide, 4-going-on-5 division champion. That's what Canelo Alvarez is. Whereas what Gervonta Davis is a guy who tried to gaslight the boxing community and fool them into thinking
that he's a 3-division champion for picking up secondary titles.
Baby belts against nondescript opponents in fights no one was asking for.
You know what? They had it right the first time. The training wheels need to come off.
Because if the story was that Gervonta Davis at 23 years old was too young to face a guy like Vasyl Lomachenko, then doesn't the same ring true for Canelo Alvarez? The difference is Canelo had that fight with Floyd, but Gervonta, he still hasn't fought a guy like Lomachenko, and he's 27!
You can't liken these fighters to each other in any capacity.
And that's what the hubbub is all about.
Gervonta's a dangerous dude. I don't care who you talk to in the sport of boxing. That's probably the only person that I've ever heard Shakur Stevenson like really say, hey man, he's the truth. He's got respect for dudes and he'll shout guys out, but that's the only dude that I've heard Shakur say, man, nah, he gave me good work. Everybody has creative matchmaking. I'm gonna get this guy, he's a name, but he's past his prime. Everybody's doing it. I'm not mad at what they're doing. I'm just saying, for me, I can't say you're the best lightweight in the world. I can't.
I'm mad and I want to see the fight.
And I also, I've heard Floyd say, well, Gervonta should be higher on the pound-for-pound list. Well, hey, now we're talking, this is a different conversation. Get the money, build the brand, but you can't do that. So I'm not going to say that about Gervonta. I can't say that about Gervonta. Gervonta is a dangerous dude that can box, got skill the whole nine. They've just chosen to take this route, get that young man paid, and keep selling out arenas. That's cool. But just don't wonder why you're not creeping up the pound-for-pound list at the pace you want to, or why you're not, universally recognized as the best lightweight. You got to fight that out. You can't talk that out.
When the face of boxing in this country, the cash cow of it, the biggest box office draw in the sport in this part of the world, when that box office draw is as active as Canelo Alvarez has been active in the last 11 months, having become an undisputed champion in only 11 months, that leaves very little excuse for what we see from fighters like Gervonta Davis. And when one such as Andre Ward uses sparring stories, by way of Shakur Stevenson, sparring stories to characterize Gervonta Davis as being dangerous, Gervonta Davis isn't a danger to anyone because he's not fighting anyone.
He's no threat to Vasyl Lomachenko or George Kambosos.
No threat to Devin Haney, or Teofimo Lopez, or Ryan Garcia, or any of those guys, really, because he's not fighting any of those fucking guys.
Floyd said they're keeping everything in-house, remember?
So how can he be any threat to them? He's not after them, or what they're holding, whatever it is they have or don't have. Gervonta Davis is no threat to these fighters, no threat to the lightweight division.
Sparring stories aren't going to convince anybody.
When people listen to Andre Ward say these things, Andre Ward, who they perceive as having some kind of underlying issue with Canelo Alvarez, some people feel that he's jealous of Canelo for having done at super middleweight what Andre Ward did not do. Canelo Alvarez has become that division's undisputed champion, the division where Andre Ward used to campaign, held 3 of the 4 alphabet titles and the Ring Magazine belt, but never became undisputed. And it's for this reason there are people out there that think
he's been shading Canelo Alvarez because he's jealous.
They saw Andre Ward assisting Caleb Plant ahead of that Canelo Alvarez fight, giving him a few pointers, a few tips, a few tricks. And you have to wonder, if it weren't Canelo Alvarez that Caleb Plant were fighting, would Ward have assisted him at all? I mean, did he assist him for the Vincent Farfendugan fight? The Caleb Truax fight? Did he give him some tips and tricks then?
Any advice for that Mike Lee fight?
Mike Lee, the Subway guy. Did Andre Vard provide any counsel for all of those fights, or was his counsel only exclusive to the Canelo Alvarez fight? Because if it was, that lends credence to the notion that perhaps there's something going on there.
Only Andre Ward knows for sure.
But that is how it's being received. That is how it is being interpreted. That in unison with likening Canelo Alvarez's matchmaking to Gervonta Davis's matchmaking. Gervonta Davis's matchmaking is so obviously...
Canelo Alvarez went undisputed in 11 months. We haven't been able to get Gervonta Davis to fight Vasyl Lomachenko in 4 years.
4 years. 4 fucking years. Those two guys' names don't belong in the same sentence. You cannot categorize what Canelo Alvarez has been doing, especially in the last 11 months, as creative matchmaking.
Hell, not even the Lunga Makabu fight.
Or the Machunu fight, if he beats him, becomes WBC champion. You can't categorize that as creative matchmaking because there are more risks involved in that fight than what we've seen for David Benavidez, than what we've seen for Jermall Charlo. Those guys have been coasting, cruising on easy street.
Well, if it's so fucking easy to move up the cruiserweight and win a belt, why don't they do it?
It'd certainly be a hell of a lot more interesting than what we've seen from them. The kind of matchmaking we've seen Jermall Charlo's middleweight campaign, the kind of matchmaking we've been seeing for David Benavidez.
Well, if it's so fucking easy to move up the cruiserweight and win a belt, why don't they do it?
David Benavidez doesn't even have a belt anymore. He could use one. And he's not Canelo Alvarez's mandatory challenger. You know, there are some people out there that seem to think that he's in line for a Canelo Alvarez fight. Not yet. He's going to have to fight in a WBC final eliminator against Canadia's own David Lemieux before he becomes Canelo's mandatory challenger. So for doing that, why not move up in weight and see about picking up a title at a heavier weight?
He is many months away from being in line for Canelo.
If Andre Vard has very recently come under fire and he is being lambasted for these comments, it's because people are sick of it. Don't give us your skewed perception of what's going on. Otherwise, you're not a part of the solution. You're part of the problem. Don't try to dress it up, disguise it, or explain it away. Gervonta Davis is a protected fighter, and it's an exceptionally bad take to liken his matchmaking to Canelo's.
Gervonta Davis is 27 years old. He's not a child.
Gervonta Davis is no more a child here and now than Canelo Alvarez was when he was 27, fighting Gennady Golovkin. There is simply no excuse for it.